Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Mia Ashton, who is the author of the WPATH files. The WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and it is the self-declared professional organization that has defined the rules of engagement, so to speak, for all major medical associations in the United States and elsewhere. Last year, Mia got a hold of documents via Michael Shellenberger that were internal to the WPATH forums, and she dove into that and assembled a report showing just how off the rails this organization has gotten. Now, for people who are connoisseurs of this particular strain of madness, it doesn't necessarily come as so much of a shock, but it's great to get more and more publicity about just how unhinged this very influential group of not even professionals in the professional sense, but activists has become. You can find Mia's work down in the description below. Please like, subscribe, and consider donating to the channel via the links in the description. Without further ado, here is Mia Ashton. There she is.
Sorry I'm late.
That's fine. You need your tea, even though you're Canadian.
Yes.
I guess you put whiskey in it.
No, I do not. And am I Canadian?
Well,
That's a question for you.
You're naturalized, aren't you?
I have a Canadian passport.
You're sleeping with a Canadian.
True.
So, I mean,
I know. I just don't think of myself as Canadian. I guess that's very that's not politically correct of me, is it?
Well, when you think of yourself, what do you think of yourself as?
A Brit living in Canada.
Oh, okay.
Even more than that, actually, an English woman living in Canada. I don't really even think of myself as a Brit.
Okay. That's fine. How's your family in England doing with everything that's going on over there?
They're all doing fine. I was there last month, saw them very briefly. I was there.
Okay.
I was in London, and I did a quick zip up to see the family. It was nice. It's been a long time. So how are you?
I'm good. I before we move on from that topic, what exactly is going on with the royal family? There's like some salacious rumors afoot.
I really don't know. I like plunging into that rabbit hole every now and again on Twitter just to entertain myself. I have no idea. There's some wild theories going around. Where is
Fog
Kate?
of war kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Good.
I have speaking of Canadians, I don't know if you can see, but I have this really great photo of Jordan Peterson. He's like the most kissable Peterson.
I love that photograph of him. He looks
My patron saint.
he
Snuggly.
looks very relaxed. That's
Yeah.
cottage Jordan Peterson. I know that because we have a cottage, and I look like that at the cottage. That sort of tranquil, calm, relaxed. I'm going to bet there's no Wi-Fi at his cottage, just like at mine. So you completely disconnect.
Yeah.
And
You just get your cuppa cider or something.
Well, read, drink tea, swim in the lake. It soothes my soul going to the cottage, and I can see that look on Jordan Peterson's face.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had to frame it. It was just very important to me. Because he's kind of a firebrand. So you made a splash, you know?
Yeah, something of a splash.
What did you expect the impact of the WPATH files to be?
It was impossible to have expectations because, this project was it was a long project. It went through many different stages. It was one thing, and then it was another, and then it turned into another. So all along the way, it was just me, writing what I wanted to write, telling what I thought was the truth. And then, before we launched, Michael asked me, "Are you ready?" And how can I be ready? I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know how it was going to land. I didn't know what the reception would be. So I can't even say it surpassed my expectations because I just did not know what to expect. But it's been quite the experience.
Oh, I bet. But you've been training for this for years now. Like
I
you
guess
dipped
so.
your toe into Red Fem Twitter, and then you got some writing gigs, and you steadily got more and more used to the limelight. If it's lime nowadays, but whatever light it is.
I'm not someone who thrives in the limelight still. It's good. Like I like this because my first ever podcast interview was with you. And I think like 2 years ago, not even, maybe. And
I
I
can't
can
remember.
just, it's good for me. I can tell how far I've come because I remember what a total nervous wreck I was and so stressed out in that first one. And now I'm far less stressed out by such things, but
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
still not someone who thrives in the limelight.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. You don't have to be a narcissistic diva to get ahead in the world, as it is construed right now. Could you give us a taste of just how much work it was? I met you in person in Denver in November, during this incredibly intense moment where a man in a dress showed up and completely derailed a very amazing conference with a lot of different thinkers, speakers, and people there. And Michael Shellenberger, he teased some things about the WPATH files. And I'm like, oh, what's going on, Mia? And you had this look in your eyes like you were digesting thousands and upon thousands of pages of stuff. So I don't think people necessarily realize just how much work you put in to this. When did it land on your desk, so called?
So I don't know if you know the story of how I started writing for Michael. That was last February when I wrote that Twitter thread about apotemnophilia, the people who want healthy limbs amputated. And it was like a thought experiment. Imagine if like a rights movement came along, amputee rights, and a bunch of kids start wanting their limbs chopped off. And so that day, Michael showed up in my DMs and offered me a job. And I actually didn't know who he was, so I turned him down. I told him I already had a job, and then he was persistent, and eventually I went to work for him in April, I think it was last year, and almost immediately he got the WPATH files. And I was writing for Public, that's his Substack, and we tried to turn these files into a series of articles for Public. And I don't know if you've looked at all of the files, but there's far too much content. I couldn't do it justice. And so we tried for some time, for some months to make this work, and it didn't work. So then Michael had the idea to move me over to his nonprofit Environmental Progress, where I could turn it into a report, a think tank report, which is what you see. So that started in late August. Okay. That really started in late August, and then was pretty much the idea was to have it published and released before GenSpect. Michael and I knew we would be going to GenSpect in early November, so that was the deadline.
Ha ha ha.
And it was somewhat done, and then certain world events happened, and editors got, distracted on other things.
World events.
Exactly. Okay. And so it was done somewhat when I showed up at GenSpect, and it was a lot of work, but I really enjoyed it because I've never done anything like that before. But I had never sat down and really read all of the scientific literature, like everything I cite in the report. I don't know how many citations there are hundreds. I read all those studies. I sat down and I was able to really, really see from the very beginning of this madness, this medical experiment, read it all, see how it all formed, and then tell what I think is a truthful story about the organization that sits at the very center of this scandal, which is WPATH. So it was an enormous amount of work. I've never worked so hard in my life. And then when I met you at GenSpect, the project was taking a bit of a turn at that point. and it became something more, and other people joined and helped shape it into something bigger. So the work continued until the release, which was March.
Yeah. So what was your goal? I guess you kind of took us through the development process, but what was was there like a narrative arc that you were trying to hang this all on, or how did you go about organizing all the information? And actually, what was all the information? And then how did you go about organizing it?
So the files themselves are, at first it was about 70 pages of screenshots of conversations going on in WPATH's forum. There's this platform called Doc Matter, and it's where, I had it somewhere.
Dork Matter? Doc Matter or
Doc.
Dark? Dark.
DOC, Doc. It's for doctors. It's for medical professionals.
Okay.
To gather, and they've got a little slogan. Oh, it's right here. Doc Matter is where experts educate to improve outcomes for all patients. It's where doctors are supposed to congregate, share the science, share their expertise, and improve the outcome for patients. And that's not what's happening on WPATH's internal forum. No, obviously, no shock there. But actually, I was kind of shocked at what is actually happening on WPATH's internal forum. Even I was, and I've been reading about them for years. So what we got is the screenshots. And it's just, there's a pattern to them, I would say. It's a member. First of all, let me just say who the members are. So it's a weird forum in that WPATH is a weird organization. One might even say queer. It's queer. It is. It's queer. It's odd. It's weird. And it's because WPATH is so strange. It's a supposedly professional organization made up of medical professionals. You've got surgeons, endocrinologists, doctors, and then you've got therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. And they're all mixed together with human rights lawyers, trans activists, people who are transgender, who seem to just be in there because they have an interest in gender medicine, like student researchers. They're all mixed together in this weird soup of just activism, basically.
Yeah. It's an interest group.
Yeah, it's not a professional medical organization, that's for sure. And so somebody shows up in the forum and they describe what is obviously a difficult case. They'll say, I've got this person, they have major depressive disorder, bipolar, whatever, and they want vaginoplasty, and I'm not sure they can deal with the recovery period. And then just a whole chorus of people come along, be they activists, medical professionals, whatever, basically just casting aside the doubt, egging this person on. Yes, they are fine. If they want vaginoplasty, they can do it. And somebody will come along and say, oh, in 15 years, I've only ever refused one person. And that's because they were hallucinating in the appointment. Like kind of this very bizarre, not professional at all.
Hallucinating that they were a woman or something like that?
No, I don't think that would count as a hallucination in this world. This person was in active psychosis and was hallucinating in the assessment. So the therapist denied him his surgical referral. Everyone else in 15 years got the rubber stamp and off they go. And she even says, presumably lived happily ever after. She's just basically, presumably just assuming that, like a homeless person. She says she sent a homeless person off for an orchiectomy and is just assuming that he's thriving and happy when she has obviously no idea. And so that's the forum. It's just this bizarre forum.
And just to clarify, this is a world organization, or is this kind of clustered in the West? Like what kind of general place are these professionals, the WPATH members, let's just say, located?
Oh, it's predominantly US, of course. Everyone in the files, it's mostly Americans. We redacted almost all of the names, but mostly Americans. I wouldn't like to guess what percentage, but as a global organization, I know that we've got just about 200 Canadian members. There aren't that many British ones anymore. And then there's just a little, sprinkling of people in other countries. So it's technically global. I mean, it's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, but it's largely concentrated in the US. And to say that they're an internationally respected organization at this point is not accurate. I think I may have said something like that in the report. They once were, but to say that they are now might not technically be true, because Europe is definitely moving away from WPATH standard of, care for the transgender people. But where was I going? What was I don't think I answered your question.
That's fun. And thanks for letting me just kind of willy-nilly go through this. But WPATH has been setting the standards for these, for the world. There's EU path or EPath, which is the European one. Is there an Asian path too?
Good question. I've never come across that. There's OzPath, which is Australia. There's the EPath, US path. There's CPath, Canada. I don't think it's very active. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure how many. When you join WPath, you instantly get membership to whatever is your regional path. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know about Asia, because Thailand, I mean, there's an industry there.
Yeah. And one supposes that their ideology that justifies these procedures is a little different, or at least the history I know is a little different to on-ramping for this kind of procedure. And what period or what years did you guys cover with these files? And was there like a cool little like Tom Cruise, The Firm kind of like smuggling this out of was there a little bit of espionage? If you can't get into it, that's fine, but just like a yes would be cool just to imagine, this guy like dressing up and then going in there and getting all these files. And
I think I'm afraid I can't say, because I don't know. I don't know who. Only Michael knows who the source is, or perhaps there's more than one. I don't even know that. So sorry, can't give you the intrigue.
I want my little Bond Mission Impossible kind of like Transition Impossible kind of film going on in my head, but I just want to plant that in the imaginations of the audience. But what years, basically?
The files that I wrote about were 2021 to 2023. You see what happened, it all came in batches. So we got the first batch, it was about 70 pages, and then we got another batch, and then another batch. And so it totals now maybe there's over 150 pages of screenshots, maybe, including some that came right at the end, right before we published. So there was no possible way to add them to the report because it was all done. So they just got tacked on to the end, because we were saying all along we're giving everything. We're not just selecting the most outrageous examples and releasing those. We're releasing everything. So we did release them, even though I hadn't analyzed them or put them in the report.
Yeah. So I asked about the years. So sorry.
Some of those might have been up to 2024. I can't remember the dates, to be honest.
Yeah. But so you're not necessarily showing like the descent of this organization from a previous state to the current state. We just have a small period of time between 21 and 23. What are like the tonal shifts in that period? Do you have a sense that they were on a trajectory before you have like them acting in this way, and then they're rapidly changing how they're acting, or are they kind of just consistently?
Well, the trouble is, like 2021 to 2023 you're in the realm of the extreme.
Yeah, it's late in the game.
The most extreme. If you're still in WPath in 2021, I mean, I'm not saying there are not good people in WPath. I think there are probably people in there who are in there to see what's going on, that they don't necessarily believe in all of it. They're interested in what's going on. Somebody gave us the files. That person is in there, I assume. I mean, how else did they get them? So I think it's all very extreme. what I liked about the report, writing the report, is that I got to go all the way back. I got to do a brief history of transgender medicine and WPATH to open it. And that was really fun to track the descent into the realm of just ideologically driven pseudo medicine and the complete abandonment of the Hippocratic Oath. You can see it. You can see it occurring. So I tracked it all, and my aim was to weave it in. So I used the words of WPATH members as a framework around which to build the entire story of WPATH as I see it. Yeah. People can disagree with my conclusions, but because the conversations were so broad ranging, basically they gave me the opportunity to talk about everything, all the important, what I think is important for people to know about WPATH. And that's basically what I did with the history woven in. And then my favorite part is obviously the comparing to past medical scandals. I loved that I had that opportunity because that's my thing.
Yeah, that is your niche.
It's my thing.
Where do you start with the story then, historically speaking? Like Harry Benjamin, Kinsey? When does it start for you?
Well, I started actually with Hirschfeld. I started in, I believe the year was 1906, was the first attempt at sex reassignment. Like, the history of trans rights is basically, it's the history of this field of medicine. Trans rights is basically all about the right to modify your body to bring it in line with how you feel supposedly on the inside, I suppose. So tracking the history of gender medicine, I started with the first attempt. What was her name? This is a woman who was, I think, Martha. God, I can't remember her surname. She was, I believe, intersex. Well, that's maybe not the right term. She had a disorder of sexual development, and she was genetically male, I believe. And so they performed some sort of surgery and attempted, this is before testosterone. So they're just, it's the early days. It was a very experimental, well, it was experimental all the way. It still is, as far as I'm concerned, very much experimental. But in the early days, they didn't have a clue what they were doing. So that's 1906. Then you've got Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual, oh my goodness, I should know this, Sexual Sciences, or what's Hirschfeld's?
Is this in Germany?
Germany?
Or the US? Yeah, okay, yeah.
So there was a lot going on in like the 1920s, 1930s. You've got attempts at, it's crazy. I mean, attempts at vaginoplasty, you've got the attempts at uterine transplants.
So they're already trying to transplant the uterine tissue.
Well, yeah, I mean, that didn't work out so well, and still they haven't managed to do that. And it's not technically a transplant, is it? Because that would be putting a uterus into someone.
Yeah, it's an installation.
Yeah, right. I mean, where does it even go in a man? I don't know.
You just kind of pop some bones.
Plunk
it's always
it in.
easy to dig a hole, you know. Men have been digging trenches since the dawn of time.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there are some who think that one day men will be able to carry children, gestate. I mean, that seems a bit far out there to me, but they can dream,
far
I
out
suppose.
there as in like chronologically or in like conceptually?
Totally crazy. Surely not. Surely not. I mean, there's a whole lot more to gestating a baby than just having a uterus. There's a whole endocrine system that supports the pregnancy. I just don't understand how you think you can plonk a uterus into a man and have him grow a baby in there. And really, on the question of medical ethics, surely that's not.
Yeah. Well, I guess that from their point of view, just the cocktail, it's just a matter of chemistry and some surgery, right? Like they can just like perform the cocktail. If they have the right tests, they can see what the baby needs and then like scan it. It's really expensive too. Like who's paying for that?
Right.
Who's paying for that baby?
And is anyone concerned about the baby's health? Because I would think that perhaps it might not be so good for a baby. There has to be a cocktail of drugs to sustain this. Is that good for the baby? I don't know that anyone's considering that aspect of it. But anyway, I'm sidetracked here again.
No, it's fine.
Okay, so the mad experiment. Then they invent hormones, or they synthesize hormones in labs, and surprisingly, still little interest in sex reassignment. The whole experiment just sort of fades into the background until Christina Jorgensen rekindles the whole thing in the 1950s, and then we're off. Then we've got Harry Benjamin, we've got Kinsey, we've got John Money. The whole experiment gets a second wind. It's had its first wind, nothing really came of it. It was all very weird. And then it gets its second wind in the 1950s. And again, it's ethically dubious, I think. They're on a quest. I think there might be some ego in there. They want to be, they want to make their mark in history. And Benjamin especially, we've got WPATH is like the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association was the original name of WPATH. So Benjamin is the pivotal figure. But again, it doesn't take off again. This is the second wind. It goes up to, I would say, around the late 1990s. It's still very fringe. It's still very obscure. I would like to think that someone somewhere was trying to do science at this point, still trying to find the best way to help individuals, mostly men, who felt that they needed to transition for whatever reason. And then the third wind is when they take this massive ideological turn around the 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, and it collides with the modern trans rights movement in its earliest stages. And once the two collide, they will not be separated. It's a political movement. Modifying your body is a human right, and anyone who dares to suggest that this medical experiment is perhaps not such a good thing, they are evil, they're transphobic, they must be silenced, and then we're off, and we end up in 2022 with a eunuch chapter in the Standards of Care.
Mm-hmm. And you have the convergence of social constructivism. You have the convergence of feminism going into its third and then postmodernist phase. Tumblr, you have the internet going on. You have these identity groups going on. So the whole thing kind of collides into this idea. I think the pinnacle idea is the trans kid, like this holy entity that just arrives and changes everything, the trans kid.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about the concept of the trans child, well, for a long time, but a lot recently, because, the NHS just banned puberty blockers and, outside of clinical trial settings. And so that's a great thing. We've even had, Alberta has done the same thing. A Canadian province has finally done it. And the world is waking up to the fact that the puberty suppression was a terrible, terrible idea. But when it's good, we have to ban them because it was an awful idea and it's doing terrible harm. But at the same time, we've got to get rid of this concept of the transgender child, because puberty blockers made the transgender child possible. That's like, if you look at it, like they basically, in the early 2000s was when this whole puberty suppression experiment got off the ground. And then right around, I think it was 2007, was that Barbara Walters, Jazz Jennings, and a few others. Yeah. And there we go. We have the concept of the transgender child. You could not have that before puberty blockers, because you could not lie to a child all the way through their childhood, tell a boy that he's a girl, put him in a dress and give him a girl's name and lie to him and raise him as a girl if he was going to hit male puberty. The only way you can have a transgender child is if you know that you can block the puberty and therefore give him estrogen and continue the lie. And so while it's great that we're banning puberty blockers, as long as the concept of the transgender child exists, we're going to have children and adolescents who think who are going to interpret their lives through this concept. They're going to think that they are transgender, and then they're going to think that puberty blockers are medically necessary life-saving care, because trans activists have told them that relentlessly over and over again, and continue to do so because of the push against these drugs. And so we've got to do both. We've really got to rid society of this nonsense concept of the transgender child at the same time as banning puberty blockers. Yeah. It's going to be very difficult to do. I don't even know how we do it.
Well, yeah, it's just the constitution of the trans kid. It's a reverse. It's like I don't know if this is the right phrase, so hopefully somebody can correct me in the comments, which is what comments are there for. Post hoc or go anti hoc or something. Like, it doesn't exist. Like, the conditions for the trans child is what the trans child is based on, but we think of it like as something that is just like divorced from the science. It's just like the kid comes out of the womb and they're trans, but trans is a material reality that is owed to manipulation of the body by the medical technological apparatus. It doesn't exist outside of that.
Well, I mean, to us, it doesn't exist outside of that. I very much think in WPATH, the transgender child exists. To them, to the people inside WPATH, I really do think that they think children come out of the womb trans. I'm sure they all think somehow that there is.
Is it a birth defect?
It's not. No, that would be transphobic.
Like, how do they? Yeah, right. So how do they conceptualize this thing? It's got to be just like a fascinating concept, because it breaks down if you look at it in any but the right way. So there's so much thinking around it to make it stand up, hold water. So how do they?
No one is doing that thinking. They are just blindly accepting, right? You can't scrutinize it. You can't think about it, because it makes absolutely no sense. Like, the idea, well, I say we got to get rid of the concept of the transgender child, but really, truthfully, what we have to get rid of is the gender identity. Because if you believe in this bodily essence of gender, and it is that which defines whether you are a boy, girl, man, or woman, then you have transgender children. You have to, because everybody possesses this gender soul. And I think everyone in WPATH does somehow still believe that, even though there's not one shred of scientific evidence to support the existence of the gender soul. And so, yeah, I cannot imagine that they are thinking deeply about gender identities and whether children are born trans. And there's signs in the files, back to the files, like there are moments in the files where they do those glimmers of possibility that they are grappling with this in some superficial way, because they'll say things. There's one that really highlights how impossible a task it is what they're setting out to do. And it's on the subject of detransition, which is just, my blood was boiling reading them talking about detransition, I have to say. And one of them says, we've got to find a way to accept that, to allow people to make whatever changes they want to make in their body at the time, while at the same time accepting that gender is something that can change over time. And so we've got to prioritize what they want now, but we also have to accept that it might not be what they want later. You simply can't do that. So they're accepting the fact that gender can change, that this is not some fixed, innate biological trait that you're born with. But at the same time, they're advocating for people to permanently alter their body based upon this trait that could change and shift over time. I don't know how they don't see the inconsistency and the total impossibility of doing that.
it kind of makes sense if they can assume that you can go from male to female and then back to male, and with very little or with negligible loss of function or health impacts, right? You can just like do this, and then we'll just do that, and then we'll just do this, do that.
I
But
mean,
they
I
got to
think
know that every time, a cut is made, scar tissue forms. They have to know that every time a hormone is taken, it's disrupting the body. And with female to male, there's no going back from testosterone.
right. Well, there's no going back from any of it at all. But I think, of course, you see the cognitive dissonance. You see them how they grapple with detransitioners. They're obviously creating a lot of cognitive dissonance, and so they are trying to create their own narrative around detransition to make themselves feel better and to reduce the internal conflict that they have. And so when they frame it as it's just another step on the gender journey, it really just it makes me want to it makes me very angry. And someone even in there says, and you can celebrate that. You can celebrate that they've come to this next step in the gender journey. The idea that somebody who's lost body parts and is facing, a lifetime, possibly, of very deep regret, and they're very angry about what was done to them. The idea that they would celebrate that. And then even in one of the conversations about detransition, I think it's a Spanish surgeon shows up, and they're all having their silly ideological conversation about gender journeys and everything. And then this Spanish one shows up and says, "Oh, I've got a patient who wants to detransition." I think they're using the wrong pronoun, saying she has had vaginoplasty and wants a reversal surgery. So I'm there. I go off to Google. I'm like, what is a vaginoplasty reversal surgery? And it's basically they somehow remove the inverted penis, and then they do phalloplasty. They take the man's forearm and they use it to construct an appendage that they sew onto his groin.
Okay.
I mean, that's no reversal surgery. That's not reversal. You're just adding more problems there. And I don't think that man would celebrate.
Yeah. So the tone is either neutral or affirmative. Like there's nobody going, whoa, wait, whoa.
No, I mean, in the conversations that we were given, right, it's very, there's one Ontario family physician who is in my mind, the hero of the files. There's one person in there who does take a step in and say, I have seen detransitioners coming back. They feel terrible pain and anguish, and they're very distressed about what was happening, and they feel they were let down. And so one person does in all of the files, except for, I think I'm going to get sidetracked here, but this I found kind of funny. So nobody talks about ethics. It's all very activist talk, about autonomy, and people should, be allowed to whatever, like change their body in whatever way. Don't worry about all the mental health issues and everything. Like basically, there is almost no one for whom hormonal and surgical interventions are inappropriate in this world, from what I could see. But then there's this hilarious post where somebody writes the initial post. They have a trans-identified male, so they will call it they'll call this person a trans woman, who wants to lactate just for the hell of it. There's no baby. This is a man who wants to induce lactation because he wants to experience it. And it is the only time in all of the conversations where a whole bunch of people show up and say, whoa, remember your oath to first do no harm. This is not medically necessary. I wouldn't do it. You're given a responsibility to society to serve, and this seems to be harmful and not medically necessary. And you just think, where were you guys when they were talking about creating a second set of genitals for someone who thinks he's both male and female? Where were you when they were talking about the teenager with an eating disorder who wants to take testosterone? There's never any question of medical ethics or first do no harm unless
Yeah.
it's some bloke who wants to lactate just for the hell of it. And then obviously, I would say that this is an autogynephilic man who wants to lactate for erotic purposes. And the interesting thing is, if there were a baby to be fed, they would have no problem with it, right? It's just the fact that he wants to lactate for the experience that they were put off by.
Huh. That gender journey. That's like off the beaten path of the gender journey.
And it's interesting because why is that? Why is that?
Yeah.
But I think it is because they all know probably somewhere deep down what his motivation is. And autogynephilia in their world does not exist. You
Okay.
can't talk about it, so you just
No.
have to pretend that it's
What happens when it comes up?
wrong.
What comes when it comes up when it comes to the topic of eroticism, sexuality?
It's interesting. So there's somebody, we had this panel leaked to us as well, and it's a very interesting panel discussion. We should come back to it later. But one of the panelists can't even remember why autogynephilia comes up, because it's mostly a discussion about children and teenagers. But one of the panelists just cannot bring herself to say the word autogynephilia. She's like, some people have different motivations for transitioning, and there's terminology that we don't use anymore. Like she can't bring herself to even say the word autogynephilia. But in one of the newer files that we were given that did not make it into the report, there is this discussion about this man. He's autogynephilic, and he sounds like the type of autogynephile who accepts his autogynephilia. He's not the majority who are in denial about their autogynephilia and tell themselves they have a woman's soul instead. And so this guy seems to be on a weird loop of he'll take hormones for 9 weeks, feminize his body to a point, and then he cuts himself off and he stops and he does 9 weeks of no hormones, and then he does it again, and then he stops. Maybe they go into why. I would assume estrogen diminishes the sex drive in men, right? So perhaps it also diminishes his desire to be feminized, and he's in this loop that he seems to be rather enjoying from what the account says. And they all then have a really hard time. They're in there. Autogynephilia is not real. It's been discredited. This is a like Ray Blanchard made it up. It's all not true and stuff. So nobody is in there saying, "Yep, this guy's an autogynephile." They're not. They seem to be judging him quite harshly. They don't think this is a man who is a trans woman who should be given these hormones. They seem to be, they are rather judgmental. I'm not, I don't know if it's good for him either, but for different reasons.
So they're trying to cling to some sort of ethical standard. Right. They don't want to if they just admitted, we're here to serve at the behest of our clients, and they want to do this thing, and here's how to do it. Here's the best way to do it. There's inefficiencies in this problem. There's all these contingencies, and some people don't want to do it. But this isn't a medical necessary thing. We're just transing humans. We're just transhumanists. And this is what you live for. This is what you do. But they're trying to keep an air of respectability, of not being accountable, but having like the authority. But you need accountability for authority to stand on something.
I mean, I think, are they trying to be ethical? I guess maybe in their minds they are.
Well, it crops up like, well, we don't like a man playing with this stuff, like treating it like they're diminishing the seriousness of our mission by just using it to get off.
It's very ideological, though. I don't know you can call it. Well, I don't know what ethical framework they think they're working with. I do know that they're existing in a very rigid ideological framework, and that man does not fit in there. So I can't imagine. Okay. I did read the WPATH. Remember the draft SOC 8, Standards of Care 8? They released a draft, and it did have an ethics chapter alongside the eunuch chapter, and then when the final product came, the ethics chapter had just disappeared. And I do recall reading it and it being largely ethics framed around medical transition being a human right, and therefore all ethics were it was framed that denying access to care would be discrimination and therefore ethically wrong. I don't recall any discussions about ethics as I think of it, which would be the Hippocratic Oath and first do no harm. That to me is medical ethics. There was none of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of rationalization, but not a lot of reasoning, like from first principles up.
Right. I mean, rationalization. So this is something I've been thinking about an awful lot now at this point, because you must find yourself thinking this, like, what's going on in their mind now? I can actually understand and don't have a lot of sympathy for any of the medical professionals at any point in this, but at least in the early days, I can understand how people did get swept up in this, because it did look like real science, and it did look like these young people especially were being helped. But I keep finding myself now, we're in 2024, we've got mountains of evidence of the harm. We've got all of these systematic reviews. We've got,
not to mention all of the lack of research that we have.
Right. We've got no research proving it's safe. Mountains, like a growing mountain to show that it's actually really harmful. Yeah. So what's going on in their mind right now? That's what I've been kind of obsessed with thinking about recently. And I just, like the self-justification, like they made this decision. Perhaps it was a difficult ethical decision. Perhaps they found it easy. I don't know. But at some point in the past, they made this professional decision to go down the gender affirming care path. And with every patient that they sent down that path, they self-justified each step along the way. They self-justified to the point where now they basically all live in like a fortress of their own making. And the truth cannot penetrate. Evidence cannot penetrate. But I just think, what's it like in their mind? What do they do when they're confronted with the recent Germany came out with the fifth systematic review, I think, or basically a review of the UK's review. And again, found that there's no evidence that this is an experiment and it's harmful and we need to stop doing it. But what does the average WPATH member do when they're confronted with that? Because it's just ricocheting off. And I just don't understand how they're doing it.
Well, it's their response, or one of the responses that I saw, I thought was hilarious, because they responded to the WPATH files. Marcy Bowers, made a statement that all of the professional organizations, but the professional organizations are using WPATH to justify them, and now WPATH is using the professional organizations. So it's all like Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man.
Right.
In a tangly web of like severed genitals and healthy breast tissue. Just kind of piling up around them.
It's so dark, isn't it? It's so dark. I mean, I've got to say, like, I did find the statement somewhat amusing. It feels wrong to laugh about any part of this because of the terrible harm that people are coming to. But I mean, when WPATH came out with that statement, sure, it's like, everybody supports this. And it's like, well, that's because you duped them and they fell for it. And then probably WPATH members are on the inside of all these medical organizations as well. Yeah. But then, that statement progressed into the realm of the truly absurd, right? It was actually hilarious.
Like
the world is not flat. First it starts, the world is not flat. Gender, like genitalia, is diverse or something.
Exists on a spectrum.
Right.
Gender, like genitalia, exists on a spectrum.
Something like that, yeah. I mean,
what's the spectrum of genitalia? I mean, you can do like sizes of penises and tightnesses of vaginas, but you can't do like, okay, here's like this magic place where a penis and vagina like meet.
Oh, come
anatomically.
On. Have you read my report? There's quite a lot about bigenitals. I mean, if we're going to talk about a spectrum of genitalia if we have to go there.
Like,
it's WPATH's fault.
Why not both? Like, porque
well,
no
I mean,
dos?
there's talk in there about first nullification, so that would be at one end of the spectrum.
Yeah, Barbie or Ken or Barbie. Yeah, whichever. Yeah.
And then you've got minimal depth vaginoplasty, which is, well, I don't know. I mean, you're not
just
going
the tip.
I guess you can't be bothered to dilate, so it's not very deep. It's just for the appearance. You don't want it to be used in any way. And then you've got, the inverted penis. You've got just regular normal genitalia. Then you've got the bigenital surgeries where they're creating second sets of genitals. There's something, I mean, is that what they were talking about in the statement? Is that what they mean? I don't know.
Can I have a penis on my elbow, or does it have to go in a certain place?
There you go. Where's the limit? I mean, where is the limit?
It's got to be in the genital area.
Listen to this. I've been talking about this in many of my interviews. I don't know if you've seen clips, but we have got this crazy case in Ontario, which shows just how far WPATH's crazy medicine. Like, I feel like Canada should be the cautionary tale for any nation who wants to see what happens if you follow WPATH from coast to coast, you don't question, and you let trans activists dictate the laws of the land. Because we've got this guy in Ontario. He's a non-binary person with female pronouns. And he wants a second set of genitals. So he wants to keep his penis and have a surgically created vagina using a piece of his colon. And so
where does it go?
Well, this is the thing as well. I mean, but they do it. So it must be somehow.
They did it.
No, here's the thing. It's ongoing. So he applied to the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, OHIP, because he wanted it covered, of course. And the OHIP, the insurance said, no, we're not paying for it. So then he appealed, representing himself at first. He now has a legal team, but he appealed. So he wrote the whole argument out that basically if he as a non-binary person is forced to go through binary surgery, that is a form of conversion therapy under Canada's conversion therapy ban that was passed in 2021. And so remarkably, they ruled in his favor. The appeal board ruled in his favor, and they're quoting WPATH, Standards of Care, the non-binary chapter, all the way through the appeal. And they're talking about individually customized bodies. And because WPATH says this is medically necessary care, we need to cover it because we cover whatever WPATH says is medically necessary care. But then the Ontario Health Insurance Plan then appealed that decision. But another crazy part of the story is those surgeries are not offered in Canada. So the Ontario taxpayer was going to be paying for this man to go and get his second set of genitals created at the Crane Center. You know, Curtis Crane, who did Scott Nugent's botched phalloplasty. There were a lot of stories about that particular gender clinic, and none of them are good. So we were going to be paying for this man to go down there to get his second set of genitals because otherwise it's conversion therapy. Like, I don't think Canadians, when they supported a ban on conversion therapy, the average Canadian thought they were supporting a ban on real conversion therapy, like gay conversion therapy.
Did that need to be banned, though? Was
of
that
course.
even...
It didn't.
Was it happening, though?
Of course not. It was completely absurd, and it was all about gender identity. It was trans activists who pushed it through. Most people thought they were, we banned something that wasn't even happening and hadn't even been happening for decades. But what we actually did was we set it up so some guy who wants a colon vagina along with his penis can claim that not doing so is conversion therapy. It's completely I don't know. It's not what most people thought they were supporting. I will be willing to bet that.
If it goes through, he'll be in the Guinness Book of World Records to be the first person to actually be able to go fuck himself, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about the positioning and everything, but yeah, what's
I
going
know.
on
Where does
there?
it go?
I really don't know. And really, like, there's your, that is the Hippocratic Oath has been, like, they have abandoned it completely. It's gone. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't call this an experiment. This is not even experimental medicine. Like, in an experiment, somebody is monitoring,
Tracking.
checking, like, is this approach better or is this one? What's the outcome? Who's doing better? Which patient group? There's control groups. Somebody cares about the outcome. This is just the Wild West. This is extreme body modification. No one cares about the outcome. And like, what, I don't know how old this person is, but I would assume that these people right now might think that that's what they want to do. But how are they going to feel about this in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, should they still be alive? I would think perhaps they might regret it, and no one seems to be considering that.
If they don't get mated.
Right.
I was just reading on Twitter about, the phenomena of like explorers going exploring in the old world when there was still stuff to explore, and they stumble upon like this little village, and there's just blood sacrifices happening, and like these guys are like, whoa, what's going on? But you see the horror, you can see the shock of the person discovering that stuff. But for the people who live in that community, like there's actually this great book on Cortez going after Montezuma, and like he goes into modern day Mexico and he just finds like ritual sacrifice. It's just happening all over the place. It's just how they made sure that the world worked. Like if they didn't kill the slave, then the sun wouldn't rise. Like they just got into that frame of mind. And according to them, that was like the religious practice. It was completely normal and necessary. And Cortez comes in there. He's like, we're putting an end to that. But like with the WPATH, it just seems like it's this little tribe that got a couple of different ideas and different pressures going on. And then they just get into this like crazed mania of trying to like, the kid has to be transed or else human rights are on the line. Like this is the end of the world if we don't trans this kid. But the difference here is that this is connected to the major establishments. All the major establishments are supporting it and lifting it up and culpable for this. You have hospital after hospital, at least in the United States, opening gender clinics in children's hospitals. You have Kaiser Permanente facilitating, like, oh, you want to be trans? Like, we'll help you with your affirmation. We'll do this. So it's the whole medical establishment. It's not just this tiny little tribe. It's like Aztec proportions. They have this temple in the middle. And then you have the United States government like flying the trans flag, right? Which is all part of the same thing.
It's totally mad to me. It's a remarkable, if you look at it, if you take a step back and you take the emotion out of it, it is actually a really remarkable achievement. What these people pulled off is incredible. There's never been anything like it. I can't call it a rights movement. It's not a rights movement. But yeah, like the fact that it was so fringe and so obscure and so totally bonkers, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere. I mean, I know we can be in competition. Which country is more insane? Which one? Canada's pretty given. We're going to give you a good run for your money, I think. Like in the fact that, yeah, it just this bonkers idea just appeared overnight. And everybody just accepted it. That's what's truly amazing to me, is like, if you think about teachers, you think about the fact that, like, certainly I would say like 2010s, early 2010s, mid 2010s, one day teachers were suddenly told that they had to teach that every child possesses a gender soul. What makes them a boy or girl is this gender soul. You can have male girls, you can have female boys. And everybody just went along with it. These bonkers materials were introduced in the curriculum, and everybody just started teaching it. And nobody, well, some people, I'm sure, somewhere raised concerns, but certainly I don't know if many did in Canada. And it's the equivalent of like teachers showing up tomorrow and being, told that they have to teach that the world is flat and the moon is made of cheese or something, like, and everyone just going along with it. But obviously that would be way less harmful because we'd have a bunch of flat earthers, but nobody would have to lose body parts for it,
Well, I mean, until you miscalculate the trajectory of a missile or some.
Sure, when they get into like, got a bit of a problem
ballistics,
there. All right. So, but how did this bonkers idea capture everyone? And I think it's because it's not a grassroots rights movement that they're toiling away and they're fighting for their rights and like persuading, open debate and persuasion, and this is what we need to live without discrimination. Nothing like that at all. Of course, it's all happening behind the scenes. It's all the work of very, very powerful, a tiny, tiny number of very powerful people who want to shape the world. They've created a fictional world in which they can be a member of the opposite sex, and they have the power and the influence and the money to just impose it upon all of society. And then we all have to live in their fictional world. And if we don't, they will destroy us. Of course, it's all sustained on the fact that anyone who dares to disagree gets absolutely destroyed. They could not have done this with open debate and persuasion like every other rights movement that came before, because it's all so completely absurd. So they have to go with aggression, bullying, stealth, and force us all. And of course, it's got an end date. You can't force people to live in a bonkers fictional world that makes no sense and kids end up losing body parts. There's an end to this, and that's coming. And that's what worries me. Like, I think the end is going to be very ugly. It's all been ugly all along, but I think the end is going to be ugly and dangerous. I mean, I don't know. Did you see what happened in Montreal?
Yeah, could you tell that story? Because you just, I think you posted that yesterday. It was pretty interesting.
It's really interesting. I'll go back to the beginning. So on February 29th, I think it was, Radio Canada, which is the French version of the CBC. It's actually the CBC. The most amazing part of this story is that the CBC did this. They did an incredible piece of investigative journalism, like real journalism, where they went undercover. They sent a 14-year-old actress undercover into a pediatric gender clinic somewhere in Quebec. She told this story, it's filmed, and she tells this story to the doctor that she has an eating disorder. And she went on YouTube or whatever, and she came across a trans influencer who also had an eating disorder, but realized that they were trans, and that's why they had the eating disorder. So then they transitioned, and everything was wonderful. The problem solved. They feel great about themselves. She's telling this story to the gender clinician. Within 5 minutes, the clinician has asked her if she wants a mastectomy. Within 7 minutes, I think there's talk of a hysterectomy, because the clinician says, this can also, the internal organs can trigger dysphoria. And within 9 minutes, she's got a prescription for testosterone. No parents there. This is a 14-year-old girl telling the story that she basically self-diagnosed as trans because she saw someone online. So incredible piece of journalism, great article that came out with it. And then trans activists, a couple of weeks later, smashed the windows of the CBC headquarters in Montreal. And then they released this statement, bonkers,
Yeah.
totally crazy statement. That's what I tweeted yesterday. And it was basically about, we have the right to do whatever we want with our body without interference from from the state.
And if mistakes are made, mistakes are made. They even go that
Right.
far.
We have the right to experiment in our bodies, even if we make a mistake, we have the right to make these mistakes. The state should not be interfering. And then a whole lot of absolutely outrageous accusations about the far right and American
And the
far right.
cultural bourgeoisie.
I know, it was like, okay, giving away some hints there about what your belief system might be. But then it ends with some sort of like, this is, we're going to fight back. And there's like
even for children, they're on behalf of children. They bring children into this, right?
Well, I mean, I drew the comparison on Twitter because they're basically saying we smash the windows. And if you carry on reporting like this transphobic reporting, we will fight back again. There will be further retaliation. That's what the statement says. But bear in mind what they are responding to. They're responding to a story about a 14-year-old who was put on testosterone after 9 minutes. And she basically told the doctor that she came to that conclusion online and she has an eating disorder. So that is why they smash the windows, because they think that 14-year-old should have the right to experiment as she sees fit, even if it means making a mistake. That is actually what they're responding to. Of course, they're looking at it through their own very selfish lens of, I want to be able to modify my body however I choose, and I don't
want
care
everybody else
about
to pay for it. That's my right.
Oh, I want the state to pay for it. We don't want state interference, but we do want the state to fund it. And I don't care about the 14-year-old girl. I don't care about like that. There's no concern there. They have no concern for the collateral damage, which is all of these young kids who they are just getting sucked into something way bigger than they understand. They're just interpreting their normal teenage angst and pubertal woes as being a sign that they are transgender. And then crazy doctors like this one in Quebec give them a prescription for testosterone. But these activists are they've already smashed windows. They're threatening retaliation. And this is only the beginning. This is truly, to me, the first time. It's the first time CBC's done anything remotely decent on this issue. Again, though, you got to understand that Quebec, the French CBC, is like the parallel universe version of the English CBC. It's like French-speaking Canadians respect the French CBC and actually like to watch the shows and read their articles, which is not the same for the English CBC.
If I ever get around to doing another teenage poetry anthology, I'm going to call it Pubertal Woes.
Yeah.
That's a good one. What about the big players? What about WPATH's intersection with the UN, WEF, or not WEF, but UNICEF? These very, very rich trans dudes, lady dudes, that you hear about, like the follow the money kind of stuff. What in the WPATH files or in your research, have you seen collusion? Have you seen, because we keep on, maybe it's just a problem with how we frame this, but we see all these examples of top down, we see all these examples of bottom up, and it might just be emergent. It might just be just a confluence of different things, because and I get in trouble for saying this, but like a lot of feminist theory went into normalizing this, right? So there's just a kind of a cultural cocktail. And then you can go the Paglia route of just saying, like, at the end of every empire, the gender binary starts to erode. It's just like kind of a byproduct of where we are as a society and stuff. But like with the power players, feeding into the WPATH, will WPATH be able to take the fall for everybody? Are they going to take everybody down? Can we look forward to like late stage, like power plays, court intrigue, stuff like that?
I mean, for the financial side of it, the report doesn't go anywhere near there. There's absolutely no mention at all. Have you ever interviewed Jennifer Billick? Have you?
No, I didn't go around to it, and she eventually started going after me on Twitter for the blood libel, femme libel. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean,
Probably off the
she's
table now.
done
No, but she's
incredible
done a lot.
work.
Yeah, she's
She's
the
your
gold
person
standard.
if you
Yeah,
want to know about the financial side, which is also crucial. And I have seen that there's been some criticism of the report that I did not go there.
yeah.
But that is just
You
a
can't do everything.
whole report. Well, that's a
Yeah,
whole report in and of itself. You could dig and dig and dig. Or Jennifer
yeah,
has done it basically. Like if she just amassed all of her work together, she'd have a huge report done. So I just couldn't go there because the report was
yeah,
about the medical scandal. It was about the,
yeah,
the evidence of the medical scandal in the WPATH files, and then I just stuck to building the history
yeah.
around it, and I didn't stray any further than that. But I mean, yeah, WPATH, well, if you look at the World Health Organization, there's definitely,
Huh.
what was that? The guideline committee, something guideline committee for gender affirming
Oh
care
yeah,
that
that they
it
kind of
just
tried to.
happened.
Yeah, it was really. They were going to do a panel or like some sort of like working group on that, and they announced it at like right at the holidays, and they gave everybody like 4 or 5 days to comment on that, and a lot of different groups on our side of this rallied to put pressure on them. It looked like that had some sort of effect.
It was amazing. People, I believe Segum should take the credit for
Yeah,
mobilizing the forces on
they
that one.
busted that. Yeah,
Over Christmas as well, you've got to suspect something, right? You have to suspect that they were deliberately trying to bury it by announcing it the Friday before the Christmas holidays, and the period for public comment ended right after the end of the Christmas holidays. But yeah,
yeah,
Segum and the wider public did a great job of putting pressure on them to the point that they did. Well, they don't actually say that they ditched Florence Ashley. He was one of the committee. There were about like 9 or 10 WPATH members on this committee, and there wasn't a single person who was.
What was the mandate for this committee? What were they supposed to be doing?
Well, it's still ongoing. It's not, they haven't ditched it. So they're going to, the World Health Organization is going to draw up guidelines for the treatment of adults now, like adult gender affirming care or gender medicine for adults. I'm not sure if children and adolescents were
It's
ever
a
on the
gateway.
table.
I mean, once you do it for adults, then you're like, well, why are we waiting until adulthood when we could just solve this problem, cut the problem off at the pass and do it to kids?
That's a huge part of my report that well, not a huge part, but a part that I go into in detail is that is what the whole experiment was about, right? That the whole experiment on children started because adults were unhappy with the outcome of the experiment that they took part in. Adult men are unhappy. They don't look like women. What's the solution? Instead of saying, okay, this was a failure, we should not have done this, let's close up shop and pretend that this never happened, or at least, not do this anymore. Someone in a Dutch clinic had the idea, well, we'll just do it to children instead, then we'll have better results. And I read the literature, they knew right at the beginning that this was going to be, there was a risk of false positives in children. And yet still they did it because the cosmetic benefits would be so great that they felt it was worth doing. That is, you can't say that they're evil people setting out to harm children, but that is an evil idea.
Well, it's just not logical. Like, how do you know that if you stop the person, it's like killing baby Hitler kind of thing. It's like, how do you know that stopping the person from becoming the person who regrets the person that they've become, but if you stop them, then they don't regret the person they become. They regret the person that they didn't become.
Right. I mean,
and they have to deal with
Jennings, you look at Jazz Jennings, he's the classic. He is the like, this is best case scenario. Transitioned as a child, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, lived his whole life as a girl, gone through the surgery. This is as good as it gets. And look at where Jazz has ended up. I mean, there's no way to know whether Jazz would have persisted into adulthood. So there's no way to know if he were one of the ones who would have benefited. You just can't, there's no way to know, but you can look at his life now and see that things aren't that great, and
I don't
it's
even
quite
think it's responsible to assume that he would be gay. Like maybe puberty would have changed his so-called orientation. I think a lot of people, like in the gender critical movement or whatever that move, the trans skeptical movement, just assume that he's a gay kid. That could have been the case, but we don't know because he was interrupted so quickly that he didn't have time to do any sort of natural development. So there's just no justification on determining what he would have become.
right. I mean, he fits the criteria of the childhood onset gender dysphoria in that, the most extreme gender nonconforming behavior and whatever. So he's as good a candidate for this experiment as possible.
Yeah, but
and yet still
I don't even think
absolutely no way.
That just brings up the question of if that criteria is even valid, because there was so much pressure put on him by his mom and the media to be that way that it was a fulfilling prophecy.
Right. I mean, no, to be clear.
I don't mean to argue with him. I'm just I'm kind of offended. My offense is showing.
I want to be clear though, because I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying. The diagnosis itself, I believe, we do not benefit from having this diagnosis of childhood onset gender dysphoria. There's no benefit to having it. I think it only causes harm. And so therefore, if I had my way, it would be gone. It would not even exist. He fit that diagnosis. He was the ideal candidate, and he is the poster child for it. And look at the outcome. It is not a good outcome. So I don't know how you can look at jazz and think that this is a good experiment. I think the entire experiment is deeply misguided, extremely harmful, and at its root, I do believe it's evil. I don't know that I'm not calling these Dutch researchers actual evil people, but I think the reasoning behind it is just it's actually evil to look at the failed experiment in adults and have the idea to do it to children. That's that was their solution. We failed over here, so let's do it to kids. That's an evil idea. But even further than that, I think that the entire diagnostic category of gender dysphoria or gender incongruence or whatever we've got is not beneficial to anyone. I think it's culture bound, of course. It's not real in the sense that cancer or diabetes is real. It's a culture bound psychiatric disorder, and I do not think it's beneficial for anyone to interpret their lives through that lens.
Not even a little bit?
No, I just don't think so.
Why do you have a ruffled collar then, Mia?
What does that mean? What's that?
I mean, I don't like if you look, I mean, I think that there's room for gender expression. I don't think interpreting your life through it, but I think returning to a reasonable... No, you misunderstood. Okay.
No, gender dysphoria. I'm talking the DSM diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Yeah. You can debate forever whether it's real or not, whether there's a real psychiatric disorder that is gender dysphoria. I mean, that's one debate. The more beneficial, the more interesting debate is it beneficial to the person given that diagnosis? Does a person benefit from either self-diagnosing with gender dysphoria and then pursuing medical intervention? Yeah. Do they benefit? And I do not think that anyone benefits from the existence of this diagnostic category. Gender, yeah, of course. How can I sit here like I skew towards the more extreme end of what would be stereotypically feminine?
The world is not flat.
The world is not flat.
Clothes, like genitals, exist on a spectrum.
Collars exist on a spectrum, and I skew towards one end of the spectrum. I cannot sit here and say that gender is all nonsense, abolish it, whatever. I'm not that. Okay. I don't exist in that world.
Yeah.
I have...
so get your medical model out of my fashion sense kind of thing.
Right, right. I mean, get rid of, if I had my way, we would get rid of the entire category, the entire diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Because as long as the diagnosis exists, I've
It
talked about
affirms
this
it.
endlessly,
Yeah.
as long as it exists, people will select it from the symptom pool. People in distress will think, why am I distressed? Why am I feeling so terrible? They will unconsciously select from the symptom pool gender dysphoria. And with that selection comes a medical pathway that I do not believe benefits anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would be better off living the non-medicalized life without giving themselves or being given the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. But as for differences in gender expression, that we should celebrate that, to express yourself however you like. But as well, you can't suggest that gender is nonsense. Like I have three children, two boys and a girl. And in my past life, before I became, somebody that many people dislike, I had a group of mothers. We all would get together. We would go to the park with many, many children amongst us. And many of these, two of them were certainly very woke to the point that they will never talk to me again. And others were on a spectrum of woke. Woke is a spectrum. And so they were very much in this mindset of, raising the genderless children, like to give them, like whatever toys. There's no such thing as boy toys, girl toys, everything. Yeah. And yet we would all arrive at the park, and in an instant, the boys would grab sticks, go over there and start fighting, stick fighting and charging around. And the girls would separate and they would go over there and they're drawing in the sand and they're talking and they're doing whatever. Yeah. And I recall once pointing that out, they say
noticing is always the path to bad outcomes, Mia.
Turns out, yeah, it didn't go down so well. I'm like, the boys always do this. Look, they're over there with their sticks and the girls over here. And it was like, they dropped like a lead balloon. Nobody was particularly happy about the fact that I had pointed out an obvious difference between girls and boys. But there's where gender dysphoria comes from, is that if you're a boy and you skew over here, that's perfectly fine. Yeah. But you're going to feel different. You're going to be set apart from those boys over there, and that's going to cause discomfort. So the dysphoria comes from not being accepting of this little boy who wants to sit over there and do the Jazz Jennings type, who wanted to play with the Barbie dolls and wear the sparkly bathing suits. And so we would be so much better if we could just accept that people sit in various places along the gender spectrum and work on just having everyone accept that, rather than feeling like we have to chop body parts off to make everyone fit where they should on this spectrum.
So you dropped a hint, and if anybody's watched our first interview, and they should, because it's awesome, it's down there in the description, making a note to put it there. You have a hankering for medical scandals. You have a hankering for odd things that have happened in this field called medicine. This gender thing, is it different in kind or different in just quantity or power, or extent from other instances?
I mean, it's different. It's so mad. It's so awful. It's so terrible what's happening now that in the report, I use 4 past medical scandals, and I selected those 4 for a very specific reason. And it's because I believe you combine all 4 of those into one, and you basically have today's super scandal, but you're still not quite there, because you need the
gain of function scandal kind of thing.
Well, you need, like, even today's scandal, you've got to add in this crazy political movement that is so powerful and so like dominates our lives and prevents us from speaking or even raising concerns. Like, there's never been a moment like this. If I had had the opportunity, I would have added a 5th one. I would have added multiple personality, but the report was already long enough that I couldn't add another one. And
multiple personalities already in the report.
It's in the report, which I think might have made a good case study. And I really want to delve into multiple personality at some point. But But in the report, what I chose was obviously lobotomies. And I think I structured it in a way that I don't think actually people are understanding what I was doing, because people have missed the point on this. So I take lobotomies and that I compare to genital surgeries. I'm talking about like sticking ice picks in through the eye socket, wiggling them around, destroying a core part, destroying a person's humanity. I'm comparing it to this as a means to cure a psychiatric disorder, comparing it to the surgical attack on the genitals, which is another core part of what makes us human. Our sexual identities are really important, and it's a core part of what makes us human. So there's the comparison there. My favorite case study is the ovariotomy. So this was the medical scandal in the 19th century where they were removing healthy ovaries as a means to cure mental illness in women, totally pseudoscientific, based on reflex theory, which is one organ could create symptoms in another organ in the body. There's no science to it whatsoever, but it's the 19th century. And I compare that to the attack on women's reproductive organs and their breasts now. It's a good parallel, because women in the 19th century were actually imbibing the narrative of reflex theory, and then they were fixating on their ovaries, their healthy ovaries, as the source of their mental distress. So then they would show up and ask surgeons to remove their healthy ovaries. And some would, after the fact, say that they were cured. It cured them. It's totally placebo. It's power of the mind. There was no link whatsoever. And of course, it's just like now, the girls and the teenage girls and young women who are focusing on, they become fixated on their secondary sex characteristics as the source of their mental distress. And all they have to do is get a surgeon to remove them, and then they will live long and happy lives, and they'll be cured. It's the same thing. And it's even the same because in the 19th century, if you opposed ovariotomy, if you were opposed to it, you were accused of being wanting in humanity. That's a direct quote. Like, those who were opposed to this surgery were wanting in humanity. They were bad people. They were denying women the care that they so desperately. Wanting in humanity. Well, there you go, right?
The basket of deplorables of the 1900s.
Well, it's us, right? We're all wanting in humanity because we think it's wrong to chop the healthy breasts off a 16-year-old lesbian. It's history. They say, right? Like, history doesn't repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. I mean, I think that's attributed to Mark Twain, but I don't know if he actually said it. Yeah. So there's that one, which is that aspect of it. And then, of course, I have to talk about the amputees, the people, apotemnophilia, the people who want their healthy limbs amputated, normally just one limb. And it's a fixation. And they you know, if you dig into that literature, you feel like you're reading the literature on gender medicine. Like, there are people in there who are basically saying, I feel as though I'm born in the wrong body. I should have been born into the body of an amputee. I don't feel whole with four limbs, you know, and they very specifically fixate on a certain, you know, they'll want like a lower leg 2 inches below the knee, like that. They're very specific about the amputation that they want. And of course, it's the removal of healthy body parts that it becomes an obsession and a fixation, and it takes over the life, which again, that there's a lot of that going on. But actually, I compare that to the non-binary surgeries, because to me, that is surgeons creating body types that do not exist in nature. And they use that phrase in the WPATH files. There's a guy in there, a surgeon, who's saying, this is in the really bizarre conversations about non-binary surgeries. And he's saying, you know, I've treated people who are eunuchs. We're on this, I think he says, we're creating the first of their kind surgeries, and we're creating body types that do not exist in nature. And I just, like, to me,
was he proud?
Yeah, they're all, they see themselves as being on this, you know, this new frontier of medicine. And I don't understand. I really can't put myself in their minds, because at least what I say in the report is with
Because you're
apotem.
wanting in transhumanity.
I guess so. There you go. I'm a terrible, terrible person for not thinking you should create second sets of genitals. But in that, like the apotemnophilia one is really interesting, because I actually looked. I tried to find evidence that there are surgeons who will amputate healthy limbs, because like I've written about it before, the surgeon in Scotland in the 1990s who he performed a leg amputations on two men. Like, he removed the lower leg of one man in 97 and another man in 99, was set to do another one. The press caught wind of it, big scandal, and the hospital closed the whole experiment down because of the negative media attention. And so if you're not willing to, I couldn't find anyone who will publicly at least advertise or say that they will amputate a healthy leg. And yet you've got gender doctors all over the place advertising nullification and bigenital surgeries, which have a much more detrimental impact on the body. If one is a violation of medical ethics, why is the other not? This one is far worse. The non-binary one is far worse. And then there's the hormone therapy, which we talked about last time, with the correcting the height of tall girls and short boys, which the obvious parallel is it's pediatric endocrinology. But you combine all four of those, and then you add in the most insane rights movement, supposed rights movement in all of history, combine all that together, and you've got today's medical scandal. And at the center of it sits WPATH. Yeah. They are the ones who have unleashed this upon us.
Yeah. Is there how does the story end? Like in Nuremberg?
I really do think there will be. I think there will be inquiries, at least. I think there will be. I thought about this a lot, like the end, because it's got to be coming. We've got to be getting close.
Well, in the trans skeptical, like the people who've been following this, me, you, and a lot of other people in this area, like, there was a tendency to celebrate when the New York Times would publish an op-ed that was like slightly like, oh, maybe, but you see this cumulative effect. The WPATH files isn't the end of the road. It's not like this holy grail moment. It's just like, it's another, like, the ratchet is clicking, and it's clicking in one direction. It's clicking towards evidence, truth, because of a lot of different things. Insurance, lawsuits, detransitioners, all these things. It's just the political ramifications, how that's going to shake out, and then accountability for the people who authored all this stuff.
That's So there'll be first wave really malpractice lawsuits. Even just the threat of malpractice lawsuits typically make insurance companies very uneasy. And so I don't know which states it is. Maybe which states have done the thing that everyone needs to do, and that is increase the statute of limitations to 30 years. Okay, so if you transition a minor, you have to, the statute of limitations is open for 30 years after they turn 18. Yeah. And if you're so confident in your gender affirming care that you're picking out only the so-called trans kids who will benefit, then you've got nothing to worry about. Absolutely fine. Everyone is going to live happily ever after. So whenever everyone needs to do that first and foremost, because this is not just your average field of medicine. This is, that's how you open up. I think that's why we don't have that many malpractice lawsuits, because of the statute of limitations being so short, and it takes so long for these individuals to admit to themselves that they made a mistake and that they regret. And so that's the first thing. So then the lawsuits come along, and of course they will win, because this is a true medical crime that the likes of which have never been seen before. So all the malpractice cases will win. And then I think after that will be the inquiries. The people will then want answers. Sure, this medical crime is out in the open. We see the number of victims. I don't know that we'll ever truly comprehend the number of victims. No. But then comes the inquiries. We want answers. Why did this happen? How did this happen? How did every single health authority and medical association fall for this utterly absurd idea that WPATH thrust upon us? How did they fall for the facade? Like, how did they buy into this idea that this group of trans activists with no respect for the Hippocratic Oath could ever have been the people to set the international guidelines for an entire field of medicine. So it's going to be decades in the making. And then I think about, there's the whole what to do about the doctors, part of me always leaps to they belong in prison. I have that impulse when I read about what they're doing and the harm that they're doing. I do have that strong impulse that they need to be criminally charged and put in prison. But of course, it's not as simple as that, because they're not evil people setting out to ruin lives. They're doctors who think they are helping.
Well, I mean, there's always the honorable thing of committing seppuku. Ritual suicide. I mean, it's just like that's the honorable path.
Don't know if we want to go there.
Well, you can bring it back. I mean, you can bring it back. I mean, it's an honorable thing.
I tried to look for doctors who were criminally charged. That's what I was looking into.
In these various different other scandals, or in
just in the past, because it's actually very rare. So all I found was in France. So people can watch the other interview that we did where I talk about the hormone therapy scandal where kids were given growth hormone that was contaminated with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and they died of this terrible brain wasting illness. And in France, I think 3 or 4 doctors were criminally charged with manslaughter because they continued to prescribe the contaminated pituitary human growth hormone after they were aware of the risk. They were found, if I remember correctly, they were found guilty, but they were not, they received suspended sentences. And then the only other instance that I found of criminal charges was East German doping scandals, when they were giving the teenage girls the testosterone, telling them it was vitamins, and they did you know that they were giving them testosterone pills, but they told them it was vitamins. These teenage athletes, they many of them died of cancer or had like terrible reproductive problems, or babies with club feet and whatever. Like, really, they did terrible harm. They couldn't criminally charge them for the adults that they had given this hormone to, but they were criminally charged with causing bodily harm to a minor. And that's where I was thinking the parallel, because I mean, we've got reckless doctors giving teenagers testosterone. God only knows what the repercussions are going to be. We have no evidence to say this is safe at all.
Planned Parenthood, not even doctors.
Right. But I mean, I don't know. I think perhaps the criminal element was the deception. Like they were telling them they were vitamins. So I'm not sure that we can, I don't think there'll be anyone charged for this, but I do think that they'll have to live with the guilt if they ever admit it to themselves what they did.
If they ever admit it. Yeah, and it's between them and God at that point. At this point too, but it is between us and the children. What happens next for you for this project?
Right now I feel I'm existing in some sort of limbo, because I worked I can't overstate like honestly Dickens. How much I worked hard on this. Like, I worked 7 days a week for a long time, and I put a lot into it, and then it was released. And then all of a sudden I'm not working. Well, actually, no, I have been doing endless interviews and stuff, but I've just been talking about the work, and I'm not sure. I don't have another project on the go. There are things that I want to write about, like part of the report, because I went into regret and the inadequacy of self-report as a measure of the outcome for these patients. Like, sure, they all say they're happy, but that's, there's a powerful psychological impulse there to not admit to yourself that you regret it. And I think I know some trans activists didn't take too kindly to my framing of that. And so it's made me think that I want to delve into that, write a long form piece that really looks into all angles of it, perhaps with people who are happy with their transition as well. I'd like to write something about that. And I'm also kind of obsessed with the intersection of trends and tech, because I was reading about the glass delusion. I was reading about the cement delusion and all these delusions that have evolved, these mad moments where psychiatric disorders have arisen with technological advances. And then I was in DC. This is what sparked it. So I was in DC a couple of weeks ago or last month, and I got an Uber because I was late. I'm always late. If you know me, you know I'm always late. And in the Uber, it just so happened to be this radio segment of a guy who had found his woman's soul and been inspired to transition, but after playing around with Face app. And it wasn't a joke, it was for real. Like, this was this inspiring story about this guy who had been playing around with Face app, turned himself into a woman on this app, and then actually gone down the medical route and had fully transitioned. And it gave me the idea that I really want to dig into this, the influence of technology on people's desire to transition, and how technology has influenced all of these crazy moments in the past as well, like the glass delusion, which is one of my favorites.
Which one? What's that? Just for clarification.
So the glass delusion, it was started by, I'm not going to get it right actually, but I think it's like a 15th century French king, Charles VI or something. The man was definitely not psychologically stable. He had some mental health issues. Yeah. And at the time, glass had been around for like 1,000 years or something in some form or another. But there had just been this new type of glass invented, and it was clear, and people were kind of obsessed with this new type of glass, and the French had invented it. And so this guy has something of a psychological breakdown and becomes convinced that he's made of glass. And so, he's wrapping himself in cushions and everything, and people can't touch him. They have to stay away because if they touch him, he'll shatter and break into a million pieces. And so what's interesting is he triggered something of a psychiatric epidemic of glass men, people believing themselves to be made of glass. Yeah. And it went on for quite some time. It went on. There's even, I recall reading a book that I love, Middlesex, which is anyway, it's a very famous book. And in that book, I'm quite sure there's some sort of Greek military commander in the 1920s who also was convinced that he was made of glass. So it's somewhat endured. These things never really disappear. Yeah, they have their trigger. Yeah. They have their moment, and then they they remain with us at all times. But this was just because they invented a new type of glass, and it seeped into the mind that was on the brink of madness, and then it triggered a social contagion of glass men.
There's something that my wife, Leslie, brings up, Leslie Elliott, is that, we're talking about the organizations. We've been talking about the organizations, but the truth of the matter is that trans people or transed people will be among us now. The geno's out of the bottle. If you're really hard against this, we're still going to have to deal with, and this is something that came up when the really idiotic fallout, sorry, if you thought this is a major cultural watershed for women's rights, but the fallout from the GenSpec conference, it's like a lot of people made a lot of hay about like whether or not we're going to accept a man who doesn't want to medicalize, doesn't want to go into women's spaces at all, just expressing himself in a feminine manner. But, in the photos that sparked that, there were actual trans people, a trans-identified male, no longer trans-identified, shapeshifter, was in that photo, had gone like so far down that path, is having major medical complications. What do we do with a person like that? Do you have this complete gender rigidity around that? Like, these people are taking these hormones, these experiments are being made, they're being engraved upon people's flesh. Those people still deserve I mean, this is kind of like a weird kind of trans acceptance speech that I feel like I'm ebbing into, because there's cultural repercussions, and these people are going to be among us. And there will be continue, whether or not you agree that adults should do whatever they want to do with their bodies, whether you agree that that's an ethical stance or not, when you look at like what they're actually doing to their bodies or what's being done to their bodies. The fact is that people are going to be doing that. People are going to do that. People have been doing that for a long time. You're not going to stop men from getting breast implants any more than you're going to stop women from getting breast implants. There's a cultural kind of aspect to this. I want to use the word Christian, but like in the least religious sense, just like, how do we live among our fellow man and afford the basic level of respect to all these people. And as we go along and target the medical industry and deal with these crazy activists and deal with these really powerful moguls who are doing this, there's still just the cannon fodder is in the thousands. Hopefully doesn't go beyond tens of thousands, but I think it's already in the tens of thousands for this. And those people, the vets of this particular weird medical war, will need to be afforded, understanding in the very least.
Yeah, this is probably not going to be a popular thing that I say, but whether you like it or not, that there exist people who identify as transgender, you cannot like that, but they do exist, and we do need to find a way to accommodate them as a society. And what I think is probably unpopular that I've said before is that the vast majority, perhaps all, are, well, certainly the young ones who are caught up in this social contagion, and whatever presentation of gender dysphoria they have, whatever motivation there is there, they're all innocent. They all were in a very difficult place in their life, and they got sucked into something that was very alluring, and that we have to take responsibility for, because we as a society allowed this whole ideology to capture every layer. We were, caught off guard, and we allowed it into the schools. We allowed it everywhere in society. And then a whole bunch of very innocent people got sucked into it. And yes, they've made permanent changes to their body, and we are going to have to find a way to accommodate them. Where I'm probably more hardline than many people is that I still think that is possible. We can still deal with this group of people and at the same time maintain women's right to female-only spaces. I think grounding ourselves in reality, getting to the truth of the matter, that nobody can change sex. There's no such thing as a male woman, and that women do have the right to female-only spaces, no exceptions whatsoever. And then on the other end, discouraging medical transition, discouraging it, not selling it as the miracle cure for everything that ails you, not celebrating it as a wonderful, healthy, natural part of human existence. And also, just for the sake of everybody going into it, must know that it's going to make their life more difficult. Society is not going to bow down and accommodate their every desire. And that if you do still make the decision to go down that route, you have to be realistic and know, if you're a man, you're not welcome in women's spaces. If you're male or female, you're probably going to make your life a lot harder. You're going to destroy your health, and you're probably going to make your life a lot shorter. And so, yeah, it's like we did let
Plus,
the
you'll
genie out
be
of the bottle.
dependent on medical technology.
Right. Who wants to live a medicalized lifetime pretending to be something that you're not? It should be actively discouraged. And I'm sure this is not going to please trans activists, but it's the truth. This should not be encouraged, but we absolutely
Can we take a minute to wave at all the trans activists that are watching our show? I wonder if there are any out there. I don't think they get that far.
I'm sure. Well, somebody's going to watch it, aren't they? and complain. I have a piece on transgender map, the hit piece on transgender
you made
map.
it. I have a beach towel. Did they do an illustration of you?
Oh, I don't think so. Not yet. Maybe that's coming.
Yeah.
But I think he watched my first interview because I'm quite sure he's quoting from the interview that we did 2 years
really?
ago.
Oh,
I think so.
interesting.
There's quotes in there that I'm quite sure
Andrea
I only
James.
said to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know. I don't know how you compassionately deal with this group of people. And I do think that the compassionate response is to bring them all back to reality. And then they will know that anyone not using their pronouns isn't doing it because they hate them and want them dead. Anyone objecting to the medical treatment pathway it's not that they hate them and wish them harm. Like, I don't know how you bring this group of people back to reality, but that's got to be the starting point. While at the same time, women
That's
keep
a tall
their spaces.
order. I mean, that's a tall order. I mean, just talking about like the difference between reality and their ideology is pretty stark, but we can at least disconnect or, demolish in the public eye their ideology. Bring in stark relief.
Yeah.
The irreality that they worship and the reality that we all commonly dwell in.
But the kind thing to do is actually to bring them back to reality.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's kind to allow them to exist in that world where anyone who questions their ideology hates them. It's very cult-like, of course. Yeah. The kind thing to do is to bring them back. And I think it's almost impossible, but that's what we should be aiming for.
Is there a fun vacation that you guys went on or that you're planning? Just to jump out of that turgid mess of a conversation. Is turgid the right word? I think that's one of the words I always get wrong what the meaning is. But do you have like a hobby outside of smashing the transriarchy?
This has taken over. I mean, this took over my life years ago, but we're in a new realm of this has totally taken over my life at this point that I don't have anything else because I'm not even, I was working 7 days a week. Well, we have the cottage. I adore the cottage. It's my sanctuary. I swim in the lake. I read. I have, I still try to read fiction. Fiction is a good release. I do find for some reason that I'm just rereading. I used to read and read and read, and I, went through hundreds of books during COVID. And then now I find that to help me unwind, I'm just rereading books. Like I just reread my favorite book, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I just finished it probably for the 10th time. I've read it so many times and it comforts me. I open it to the first page, I start reading and it comforts me.
You were whisked away.
I am. And it's almost, because I know it almost by heart, I can feel the good lines coming. I know what's coming next. And I cry at the last chapter every time because it's so gorgeous. So I find I'm just taking comfort in old favorites, but literature that I loved. Because I think what I'm doing is so mentally taxing that I can't even deal with new fiction. I can't deal with wasting my time trying to get into a book that I don't really like. So I'm just choosing the old books that I loved and just rereading them. And then, we've got a holiday in Nova Scotia. We used to go to Maine until COVID and then the border. We couldn't cross the border because the kids were not vaccinated. So we started doing the Nova Scotia holiday, which is like, as a Brit, I am coming to terms with how big Canada is. Yeah. But, the nearest beach is like 13 hours away. It's like quite the drive. Yeah. But Nova Scotia is lovely. It's totally worth it. It's really, that's the big plan for the summer.
What do you guys do, lobstering or crabbing or fishing, or you just hang out on the cozy coast?
We eat lobster. We don't go and catch lobster, if that's what you mean. We eat lobster.
Like, what's the activity out there?
There's a whole lot. You see, I'm made for the beach because I like to read and I like to swim.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Last year was the first time we went to the beach with two two of the offspring who were no longer what you would call children.
Oh,
One teenager and one more of a teenager than her older brother.
yeah.
And so it was a bit of an experience to take these non-children to the beach because they
So
very
far.
quickly wanted to leave. So we're going again. I asked them, we booked a cottage. I asked them, they were the ones who wanted to go. So we're going and we'll see. They're sweet. They're not for as far as teenagers go. If I remember what I was like as a teenager, this is nothing compared to that. But yeah, that's the big plan. And then I'll be at GenSpect in
In
Portugal
Lisbon?
in September.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna take my husband with me.
Oh,
We're gonna make something of a holiday out of
wow.
it.
Nice. And so where is your writing found right now? Do you have your own independent place, or are you working with Shellenberger's various different pies?
I'm still employed by Environmental Progress. So the WPATH files report, you can find that at Environmental Progress. I have published on Michael's Substack, Public.
Yeah. Is that with a
And
K, like magic? Is it, or is it just
no,
public, like just with the C?
with a C.
Okay.
It's I also do have a Substack because I took the Crimea River Substack, but I've written nothing. I like
Did you
if
pivot
I
when the Ukraine war came out and like started speaking a lot about Crimea?
no, didn't even enter my mind. Have you just
No.
ruined my Twitter handle for me? Is that
Crimea River. Is there a river in
Crimea River?
Crimea?
Is there a river? I would
I don't
think there
know.
probably
Well,
is
I
a
mean,
river.
you started the pun, so I'm going to the next.
Nope, didn't even
Okay.
enter my mind.
All right. No, not interested in ancient
What's interesting is I
context.
find I meet some people in real life who call me Maya, and I think, what do they think my Twitter handle is? It's Crimea River, but then people,
Crimea.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah. What's some of the? It's too early. What date were the WPATH files dropped? March, like
Fourth,
4th. Okay, so we're 2 weeks out now. So it's way too early to see the impact. Has there been any impact yet from that you've seen, like governments, professional organizations, anything like that, political ramifications?
well, in the UK, we got a lot of coverage. And if I remember correctly, the NHS did state that we do not follow WPATH. It's not that they abandoned WPATH because of our reports, but they plainly stated that we do not follow WPATH. And that's part of my thing is that I think it's great that you abandon WPATH, that you see this organization for what it is and you stop following its guidelines. But I think it's actually really important not just to quietly remove it from your footnotes or whatever from your website, but to actually publicly come out and say, we are no longer following WPATH because they are not a medical organization and they're just trans activists. And so I think the NHS did say we're not following them anymore, and that's a good thing because then it will encourage others to abandon them as well.
Yeah.
But you have to do it publicly, otherwise it's not going to inspire anyone else to do it.
Is Canada more in the line with following the European standards of care, generally speaking, because it kind of has a European model with the socialized medicine, or does it kind of follow, ideologically speaking, U.S. more?
Oh, I mean, we follow WPATH, if that's what you mean.
Okay.
In every province.
So no like wiggle room on that, no budging.
None whatsoever. Of course, Alberta finally is the first Canadian province to ban puberty blockers. So I would assume that they will be. I do hope that Alberta is now looking at every gender clinic in the province and seeing WPATH's influence in there. I haven't looked at their provincial health insurance, but the ones that I have looked at, all we have provincial healthcare, we have subsidized healthcare, and so what what is covered is basically what WPATH defines as medically necessary. All of our provinces look to WPATH as the gold standard to follow in all things gender medicine. And so it would be, we didn't get a lot of coverage in Canada, which is obviously not surprising at all. And it would be great if we could. I think there are plans, many people have plans to get the WPATH files to politicians, provincial politicians, and get them. If we didn't get the mainstream media coverage, we have to take it in a different way. People are planning to do that. Whether they'll listen or not, I mean, Canada has managed to block out everything, the CAS review, like Sweden, Finland, Norway, England, Denmark, France, Germany, everybody's pivoting in Europe. And Canada, we're just carrying on business as usual. The science is settled. Puberty blockers are great. I read an article, the Canadian pediatric endocrinologist who is in my report saying insane things about, talking to kids about fertility preservation is like talking to a blank wall and all this stuff. And he's been quoted in recent articles in the CBC calling puberty blockers reversible and commenting on how safe gender affirming care is. So it really is business as usual. But I mean, I don't know if you want to carry on much longer, but there's one response to the WPATH files that blows my mind. And that is, the journalist Benjamin Ryan?
Yeah.
He wrote an incredible piece, like really good journalism, published in the New York Sun, I think, but I often get this wrong. And so he spent a good amount of time he managed to talk to WPATH members about the WPATH files, which is an amazing achievement in and of itself. And Laura Edwards Leeper, I don't know, do you know who she is? The one who brought puberty blockers to the US. She and Norman Spack brought puberty blockers to Boston Children's Hospital in 2006 or 7. She's quoted in this article saying that the man the Canadian endocrinologist, it's like talking to a blank wall, he and all of his panel members who say the most outrageous things, they are the internal heroes inside WPATH. Everybody is looking at them as if they're the brave people questioning and looking at the ethical dilemma and calling for better care and stuff. And so on the outside, we see these people who are basically saying that they know they're doing harm. They know these kids can't understand. They know there's regret. They know that it's like talking to a blank wall. And yet these are the people putting the children on the medical pathway. They're doing it themselves. But on the inside, these people are heroes. And so to me, it's that it just strengthens the point that I make in the report that WPATH is corrupt all the way to its core and cannot self-correct, like Canada is protected in this bubble. We don't let any development from Europe penetrate. WPATH is itself just protected, insulated from all criticism. And they live in this world where those people saying those terrible things are somehow the heroes of this story. I don't know how I went on that tangent.
No, one wonders how this will be turned into somebody's favorite novel that they'll read and weep when they're stressed out about other issues in life.
I don't see that happening, but you never know. It's no Edith Wharton's Gilded Age New York, that's for sure.
What's next then for you?
I honestly have no idea.
You have some ideas.
Well, I mean, I have things that I want to write about. I have areas that are just like I feel that I want to dig into and I want to write about. But as far as big projects go, they'll be having conversations with Michael about next steps and where we're going from here. So right now I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Was this kind of design, the WPATH files kind of designed as something that one could share with their politicians, or with, is it kind of designed as a tool or a resource that can be shared? And I mean, I'm just trying to say, people can read it and learn about it, but it was designed to actually go places, right?
It was written, so it was written for people who know nothing about this medical scandal. It was written in the most neutral language that I am capable of. And it was written, I think the benefit of my being a non-medical person is that my writing can reach non-medical people. Because, you know, it's very difficult to read the scientific literature. There are some amazing studies out there, amazing articles that can be quite difficult to read. So this was written, it's hopefully accessible to people who are now realizing, goodness me, something is not quite right about this, and I think maybe we need to look into it. I would hope that people can take something from this report, and that it can help make sense of something that is so completely mad that it's almost unbelievable.
Wonderful work.
Thank you.
Feels like a destiny defining moment, how you stumbled into this thing and then you get to do this kind of thing. Are you proud of yourself?
I am. I'm proud of the final result. Yes, it was very difficult, but I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Yeah. Did you ever think you'd be in this kind of work, position, place in life?
Never in a million years could I ever have conceived of something like this. Absolutely impossible. And the person that I was before falling into this crazy world is almost unrecognizable to me now. I was very timid. I needed everyone to like me. I never expressed a controversial opinion on anything. So it's very strange that I ended up here.
It's great. That's like some sort of like weird early 2000s teenage rom-com thing, you know, like you're the girl in the glasses, you know, but you bloom. You got the gender blooming going on. Bloomed into your full self.
I guess so. I guess. I think there are lots of stories like this. I think there are in fact, I did an interview with Tiffany Justice of Moms for Liberty and Billboard Chris. And so it's the three of us on the screen. And Chris brought up, you know, who are we? Like, just completely regular people, like two mums and a dad, like no academic background, so to speak, no expertise in this area. And, you know, three people who are just three of many people who have put themselves out there, discovered skills that they didn't know they had, all for the sole purpose of defeating something that I believe is truly an evil ideology.
Well, I'm glad I'm on your side, Mia Ashton. Well, I'm glad you're on my side too.
I'm happy to be on your side.
Going to link to all your wonderful work in the description. Thank you very much for swinging by. I know you're like the cause célèbre now, so like to deign to come back to my channel is a great honor. So thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. You know, I was happy to come back.
Cheers. I'll end the recording there. And cool.